Hey everybody, welcome to Adobe Max 2022. We are running a live Q&A session. My name is Jeremy Lord. I am an illustrator and I am joined by the one and only fabulous Gemma O'Brien. So Gemma, for the handful of people who don't know about you already, can you give us a quick little intro to yourself, what it is that you do? And yeah, take it away.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. My name's Gemma O'Brien. I'm an illustrator and artist, and I'm in my studio on Gadigal land in Sydney, Australia. And I've been creating typography, lettering, illustration, and murals for over 10 years. And I'm excited to be at my fourth Adobe Max.
Ooh, that's pretty cool. So again, guys, this is a live Q&A, so please feel free to pop your questions in the chat. We'll pass them on to Gemma and get the conversation started. We actually have our first question already. So, hi Gemma, you say it took you 10 years to find your style, which hurts because I just started 1 year ago. I feel your pain. How do you think having a niche style helped you in your career, i.e. specialist versus generalist? It's a really good question.
It's a great question. And I first want to say, don't be scared of being a beginner, because that's the best place to be, I think. I also think that style comes about through creating things that you're drawn to and that you're interested in and processes that you enjoy. And slowly over time, that's what creates your style rather than setting out to, create it from scratch. So I think follow the processes you enjoy, the topics that you are inspired by, and gradually over time, the more you put yourself into the work, it will naturally progress into a body of work that reflects you. Like, I only noticed that about my work after looking back on it. It wasn't something I knew at the beginning by any means.
Yeah, I think that's super good advice. It's something that, like, the search for your style is kind of like the search for who you are, your identity. And it's one of the things that I always tell beginners or students as well, is just, if you look for a style, you'll generally find someone else's. It's to be something that is like organic and just kind of grows for you. But yeah, I think it's good as well that you mentioned, like, don't put too much pressure on yourself. It just kind of happens. Some people it takes a little bit longer than others. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. It's something that a lot of people kind of wonder about, is style, generalist, specialist. Moving on to something a little bit kind of more lighthearted, and I know something that's pretty kind of like close to your heart, is you talk a little bit about kind of like ductives and like the shapes of letters, like K being one of your favorite letters to draw. Gemma O'Brien, what is your favorite looking word?
I think my favorite looking words are ones where there's some kind of either symmetry or balance in the visual of the letters. Letters are just shapes in the same way that if you're an illustrator, you're working with, circles or squares or, these basic shapes. And I think letters are those as well. So, in my talk, I talked about the joy mural having the O in the center. I often love words like that. It's like noon, like Noon, because it's like perfectly balanced. Things where there's an overlap between what the word means and how it looks. That little sweet spot in the middle is always what I am looking for. And sometimes you can achieve that with two words together as well, or multiple words like that are of the same length. So it's always a balance between meaning and beauty.
Right, cool. You actually touched upon the next question with your joy mural, which you talked about in your session as well. Is we've got a question here. What is your favorite mural you've ever done?
I think the joy mural is one of my favorites, mainly because it was the culmination of, again, we're talking about this, a long period of time, like a 10-year journey, or even the progression for me from drawing small scale to large scale. So I feel like that marked a moment in time for me. I think it was in 2017 that was like the culmination of my skills coming together. So I love that mural. I also love some of the more commercial projects that I've done with murals. Like I did one for Tiffany & Co. And I loved working on that because it was bringing together a team of people together. I think that as an artist and illustrator, you can often be quite isolated working by yourself in a studio. So one of the great things about doing murals is that you're working with a team and there's this camaraderie that comes about. You're working towards a shared goal. And so it also took me a long time to kind of realize that some of the most enjoyable times in making are collaborative. And so that Tiffany & Co mural marked that particular moment as well. So those are my two favorites.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's like I have a sort of a similar experience of like trying to do it all by yourself, and then all of a sudden you wake up to this idea that there's like, hey, there's other people out there who may be going through the same stuff as you, and you have a conversation with a fellow illustrator and you're like, oh, you too? Yeah, I get that all the time. Okay, so it's not just me. Like that could be really like cathartic, I think, for you and like how you approach your work.
Absolutely. I think it's really easy to like lean into like the old idea of like the lone genius or the lone wolf, and you're like working by yourself and an idea comes along. But yeah, it can be quite isolating if you approach it that way. So sometimes even just having a conversation with another creative and you hear like, oh, they're having a shared experience. It can kind of inspire you or give you that little boost of energy to keep on going.
Yeah, and it's a confidence booster as well, I think. It's like, okay, cool. So I have been doing it kind of like the right way, even though it's not necessarily a right or a wrong way. But it's like the way that feels right is also the way that feels right for other people. That's kind of good to know. So I guess that kind of like leads us on to something a little bit kind of broader, a little bit more kind of heavy duty is one of the kind of the main themes of your session is this idea of kind of, I guess, a good work-life balance, for lack of a better word. Maybe this idea of like fun in a brief, doing something that you love. Would you ever like turn down a job on the basis alone of the fact that it's like, I don't think I'll enjoy this brief as much, or is that a little bit too much of a luxury, do you think?
I think it's a good question. I think you brought up a few different ideas in there, and one of them that I want to talk about immediately is, I think when you're an artist or a designer or a creative, there's this idea, and often other people say like, oh, you have this amazing job, you get to like, you know, have fun all the time. And I actually think that this is one of the things that I realized after working in the industry for 10 years, is that you kind of have to get used to having uncomfortable feelings, and that not every part of the process is fun. Some parts are boring. Some parts are uncomfortable. A lot of, especially after doing it for a long time, when you're at the beginning, I know there's a few beginners in the audience, like you're kind of like driven by the novelty and by chasing this thing. But if you want to do something for a really long time, then, patterns start to emerge. You might be less inspired by the novelty. And so you have to kind of come up with new ways of working that accommodate for the fact that some things might be tedious. Some client feedback might make you feel shit, like there's lots of this, it's this multifaceted thing. It's not all flowing ideas and creativity. And I think that this is what I had been processing in the last 5 years and what my talk kind of touched on. And I think, as you said, like turning down jobs for certain clients is definitely a luxury. And it also is something where you need to decide, like at certain points in your career, like what your vision is and what kind of work you want to be making. And sometimes that does involve saying yes or no to different projects. Other times financially, you might need to do certain jobs, and it's about like accepting that balance to decide like what does your practice look like, and having, maybe some art for you, some commercial projects, and be able to shift those different states and know why you're doing it and what it's for.
Yeah, I think, and like adding on to that, I think conversely, like, doing, you might be in a financial situation where you have to take on a job. I've had a few times where, like it's really kind of drilled into us in schools, like don't underprice, don't work for free, which is definitely, I think, good advice. But there has been jobs for me as well where it's just been like, this is probably worth more than what they can afford, but the job is super awesome, so I'm going to do it because it's a really cool job. Have you ever been in that situation?
I think definitely. I think every inquiry that comes in, like, I want to approach it with openness. And it's hard, like when you're busy, sometimes you can get overwhelmed and be like, no, I can't do this. But I think the pandemic showed us that actually, when you're not working, at least for me, I had this new gratitude for the creative process of even working with clients, or when I shift from doing a really hardcore period of working with clients to then working on an exhibition, which is like completely self-driven, then I'm like, oh, it would be really nice to have that structure and the balance. So you start to look for like, what are the amazing things that you're getting out of the different facets of your practice? And it is such a privilege to be able to be asked to do creative work. And I think one of the awesome things about being a designer and working in the field where you're working with clients and brands is that you do get to tap into like that sensitivity and that color and the creativity, all the things that make up being a creative person, and to get paid for it. And it's just about, having a balance of deciding what works for you. And I think it's always good to like remember that it's a privilege to be working and to be creating things. And it's always nice to come back. That's easy to get like stuck in a bit of a rut. And yeah.
Good answer. That's a great answer. Actually, you mentioned color just then, and one of the big things in your talk is this idea of like black and white versus color, starting out in black and white and kind of, promising yourself that you'd move to color and then taking an extra 2 years past that promise to actually make that move. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Which sort of like, why the hesitation here? What's the kind of the difference in your workflow in between black and white and color and so on?
Absolutely. I think that this also kind of plays into the idea of style and like your skills and ability. So for me, when I started out, I studied graphic design, fell in love with typography in the letterpress studio, and then began working a lot in illustration and type in purely black and white. And part of that was because it was fast, like it was quite easy to access like black pens, and I found the process to be like quite accessible and it matched my drawing style. A lot of like typography is very graphic, and so you're always looking at this like negative space or like silhouettes. And so I was very happy like in the black and white world. And to make the leap for color, I think a lot of it was fear around not knowing how to use color. I didn't remember learning color theory. It seemed like this unattainable thing. And so the idea of fear, even if it is something as simple as switching from black and white to color, which seems something like ridiculous to be scared of, I think all aspects of your creative practice can sometimes reflect another aspect of how you approach everything. So it was about like finding that confidence. And I think confidence comes from experimenting and just trying.
Yeah, right. Like you make a mistake, you learn, you do it better next time, you get a bit more confident.
Yeah, I think it's quite ironic actually, the way that I ultimately then did feel more comfortable using color was through technology, like through using a tablet and drawing, and because I was able to experiment with color a lot faster than my analog methods. So I often, am very pro analog and working by hand, but sometimes technology can facilitate a different way of working that actually builds confidence quickly. And then I took that back into the way that I paint and use analog materials.
Nice, yeah. So, like, we've got a few questions from chat. Just a quick fire question. Are you a serif or a sans serif person?
I'm sans serif. That's my natural.
So you mentioned like
that's my natural inclination.
Caps, tall, blocky letters.
Big, bold.
Yep.
Yes.
Cool. Is that because
it's like
you mentioned this idea of like
stars
graphic? Right.
Yeah, look, I think that it's, if you're working in a commercial context, it's about exploring what's right for the job. If you're working in a personal art practice, it's about what best represents what you're trying to say. If you're working from the point of view of like curiosity and type history and lettering and print history, it's it's about openness to exploring, like, I love the idea of doing something with Roman capitals and also shifting in between from different styles, from sans serif to brush script, and having that variety as well.
Right. Which one would you say is easier to do? You talked about like this idea of like ductus and calligraphy versus very kind of graphic sans serif typeface. Do you enjoy both the kind of like the classic calligraphy versus the more modern sans serif type, more graphic ideas? Do you like, would you mix
I
those
think
together?
I like it all. And look, I think everything's up for grabs in the world of visual creation and calligraphy and lettering and type. And I think that's the cool thing about working with words and typography, is that you can continue to explore different styles and mix things together. And that's how innovation happens as well. You touch on the traditional approaches, you experiment, you try things, you put weird things together and new things come out. So, it's nice to have tradition because you have this reference point, and then you kind of build and change that, and the technology also shapes that as well. So yeah, pro experimenting with combining all styles.
Cool. That sounds really cool. It's this idea of like taking some analog, putting it into digital, mixing it out, seeing what happens and kind of what comes out of that. I think is something that like I really enjoy doing as well. So it's, yeah, like you said, this idea of experimenting, is really cool. I want to shift gears and kind of go back to one of the things that you spoke about in your talk, like this idea of like your running coach, and like you got really into running, and this idea that there's this whole team behind you when you're kind of taking on something as huge as like an ultra marathon, which sounds crazy, by the way. I really like this idea, and then like we're looking at this, it really struck me of like, yeah, like why do all these other like industries and professions get like all this help behind it, but us artists are just kind of like stuck by ourselves a little bit? How would you see that kind of taking shape? Like what are some of the things that somebody could do beyond what we spoke about, kind of like talking to illustrator peers? How would you kind of quantify that support? Like what kind of shape would that take?
Yeah, well, there's a few things I started to notice, like in terms of like the fitness world and the art world. One is you walk down the street, you see gym every second shop. You see people exercising, people want to move their bodies. And it would be so cool if you walked down the street and saw people creating and making art as much as you did see people moving their bodies. Because there's a lot of overlaps, I think, in the process of getting your body and mind in sync, getting this sense of flow. And I think everyone like deserves this, not just people working in the creative industries. The thing with the coaches is around this idea of like training and support. And I think it would be very cool to have an art coach, because you have these creative ideas that you want to achieve, and sometimes it is nice to have someone in your corner kind of giving you a pep talk to get it done. And I think the solution that I started to realize might actually be you need to be your own coach. And in the same way, if you want to get fit, you make a commitment and you stick to it and you train. I like the idea of getting art fit, and you take that same approach. Yeah, right. You make a goal, you break it down into smaller pieces, you give it your full attention, you get feedback, and you work towards that goal. I mean, in a dream scenario, we could all have an art coach. But I think there's lots of things that we could draw from these two seemingly different worlds.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think is this idea of like setting a goal, trying to make it sort of semi obviously realistic for you, but it's like taking steps toward a goal rather than being like, I want to become an amazing artist by next year. Like I think that's maybe a little bit too broad. Like what are some of the steps that you can take, rather than like, it's a bit like saying like I want to beat Usain Bolt in a race. Like, well, maybe there's like steps that you can get to that. On that, actually, you like this idea of like these talks or like school, and so one of the things that I found the most is like whilst like being classically trained, you can learn how to like hold a brush in school, you can learn how to mix your paints, and here's what this brush does, and here's how this tool works. One of the things I feel is really missing still is how to like take feedback on board, how to manage your clients, how to say yes or no, which jobs to pick, like how to navigate the industry. Is that something that you feel is super important for beginning artists to at least know about in their future career?
Yeah, I think quality feedback is important. You know, feedback from social media is one thing, but feedback from like experts in your area and your field is really important. And it's quite easy to seek those out if you spend a bit of time. So it's about choosing like a small group of quality people who give you quality feedback rather than a big group of like generic feedback. And whether that's from university professors or people that you admire, to reach out. It's always no harm in asking. And there's also so many amazing resources as well online to kind of give yourself feedback. You have to be able to give yourself critical feedback as well to be then open to receiving feedback from others, I think, as well.
Yeah, for sure. Is that something that you would say that some people struggle with, is like taking feedback on board? I noticed you mentioned that you kind of like suck at taking
I mentioned
feedback
it.
on board.
Yeah.
How does, like, what kind of form does that
I
take?
think in different ways, like I'm okay at receiving feedback on jobs, but I think that having feedback and being able to reflect on your work when you want to grow, like in order to enjoy your work, it needs to be the right amount of challenge. And I think that you need to be able to reflect and like, you know, even if you're doing an all-nighter to get a job done, like, are you doing that because like it's the time management, or is it like that's how you get into flow? Just to give yourself feedback on all aspects of your process in order to be able to go to the next level.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good answer, actually. I had never actually thought about it like that, but yeah, it's interesting hearing this again from another illustrator. It's like, yeah, very true. I'll take that piece of advice. Thank you very much. We've got about 4 minutes left. So we're going to start sort of wrapping it up. I think one of the things as well that is really interesting in your work is this idea of, and this might be a bigger question than we might have time for because it's something that's pretty important, I think, but this idea of success, and like you spoke about how you know, success for you was this idea of like big name clients and billboards and all these things. And then you realize like, oh, hang on, maybe it's not where it's at. It's more just kind of achieving, like doing work that is fun. I think, is that something that you would, again, advise to like beginner artists, is like make sure your definition of like, okay, cool, I'm successful is well defined in your mind?
Look, I think that, you know, I don't regret having this vision of success being those particular things, because that is what drives you to create. And in the process of creating, you learn so many other things about your work and yourself. So I would definitely not say to beginners, like, don't strive for these things. You know, like in sport, you have a race, something that you're working towards, but it's not necessarily about the race. And it's about like that thing being a moment to like be a celebration of your work. I guess it's more about having a broad sense of success, and for you yourself to be able to assess so that not everything is banking on that one particular thing, and that you can like continue to grow. And I think the idea of endurance, like being an enduring artist, is about like playing the long game. And so knowing when you have to reassess your goalposts and, you know, but continue to work towards them. And yeah, work out what that means for you personally.
Yeah, I like this idea of endurance as an artist as well. I remember seeing a quote. I'm going to misquote this, and I'm definitely not going to remember who did it by. I want to say Kipling, but it's probably not. And it's something along the lines of like endurance. Or you know, resilience is not how many hits you can take, but how quickly you can get back up after you take those hits. And I think that's a really kind of interesting thing for like this longevity of a career. And on that, we are actually out of time. This has gone really super fast for us. I really want to thank you for hanging out with us. It's been super insightful. Really enjoyed your session as well. Great to be able to kind of ask you some questions on that. And thanks everybody for questions in the chat as well. We have got a session coming up after this as well. You can catch the replay on YouTube if you missed part of this. So Gemma O'Brien, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.
Cool. Thanks. See you later, everyone.